He would spend the rest of his career trying to remember the exact second he understood what he'd done, and he would never find it, because there wasn't 1 second. There were 3. The first was when he threw the glass. The second was when he watched it shatter behind her instead of watching her face. The third, the one that actually mattered, was 31 days later, when a woman he had called sweetheart, in front of 4 witnesses, stood up in a boardroom, and the senior partner beside her said her name out loud for the first time as managing partner. Bradley Cross had humiliated a temp on a Tuesday morning because he believed, the way he believed most things, that nobody in that room could ever touch him. He was wrong about that in a way that would take apart his entire career, his uncle's 30-year reputation, and a secret the firm had been quietly protecting since before Bradley ever got his law license. This is the story of the 31 days it took for all of that to come undone, and of the woman who never once raised her voice to do it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name, as far as anyone at Whitaker, Sinclair and Pemberton knew that morning, was Simone Baptiste, Junior Associate, Contract Review. 3 days into a temporary assignment nobody had bothered to explain. Her visitor badge said as much. Her firm-issued badge said something else entirely, and it was sitting in her bag, unused, on purpose. Bradley Cross had run the contracts division of the Midwest office for 9 years, and in that time, a particular pattern had formed around him. One that showed up in exit interviews, in quietly withdrawn complaints, and in a stack of files that a woman 2 floors above had been collecting since long before Simone ever walked through the revolving doors downstairs. 3 questions would follow this story to its end. Who was Simone Baptiste really working for that morning? Why had nobody at the firm been able to touch Bradley Cross in 9 years? And what, exactly, was his uncle protecting when he protected him? Simone Baptiste had spent 12 years learning how to sit in a room and be underestimated. She had grown up in Detroit, the daughter of a hospital administrator and a high school civics teacher, the first person in her family to walk into a courtroom as anything other than a spectator. Her mother had kept a framed copy of Simone's law school acceptance letter on the mantle for years, beside a photograph of Simone's grandmother, who had cleaned downtown offices for 3 decades and never once been invited to sit inside one. Simone had grown up understanding, without anyone needing to spell it out, that the room she was walking into now had never been built with her in mind, and that the only real way in was to arrive better prepared than anyone who assumed otherwise. She earned her law degree at the University of Michigan, then a master's in regulatory compliance from Georgetown, and by the time she was 29, she had already defended 2 Fortune 500 boards through fiduciary breach investigations that other, older attorneys had quietly declined to touch, citing risk to their own reputations if the cases went badly. Simone had never once turned one down. She had built her reputation the hard way, in rooms that assumed on sight that she was in the wrong meeting, that she was someone's assistant, that she had wandered in by mistake. She had learned not to correct that assumption too quickly. It was, she had discovered, a useful kind of camouflage. People said things in front of a woman they had already dismissed that they would never say in front of someone they respected. When the search committee at Whitaker, Sinclair, and Pemberton approached her 14 months earlier about becoming the firm's next managing partner, she had said yes, on one condition: that the appointment stay confidential until she had walked the building herself, unannounced, and seen how it actually operated when no one was performing for leadership. Emmett Whitaker, the firm's senior founding partner and the man who had pushed hardest for her hire, had not loved the plan. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone in that building," he told her over the phone, more than once. "The vote is already done." She told him, gently, that the vote had never been the part she was worried about. She respected his concern enough to let him voice it, and then she did exactly what she had planned to do anyway. Bradley Cross, meanwhile, had built an entirely different kind of career. 9 years into managing the contracts division, he had earned a reputation among senior partners as sharp, aggressive, and reliably profitable, the sort of manager whose numbers made it easy to overlook whatever else got said about him in hallway conversations that never made it upstairs. Among the associates, paralegals, and support staff who rotated in and out of his office at a rate nobody senior seemed to examine too closely, a very different reputation had quietly taken shape over the years, built around a string of sudden resignations, unexplained transfers, and an unspoken understanding passed down from one new hire to the next. Keep your head down around Bradley Cross, and never complain about him to anyone who actually mattered. What almost none of them knew was that Bradley's mother was the younger sister of Desmond Sinclair, the firm's other founding partner, a fact that had never once appeared in any personnel file, any promotion review, or any disciplinary record in 9 years. Desmond Sinclair had built his entire reputation on discretion, on being the partner who never raised his voice and never needed to, the kind of quiet institutional authority that made people assume he simply didn't involve himself in the firm's messier internal matters. He had also, for 15 years, made absolutely certain that his nephew's name never touched a complaint that could stick, working not through direct interference, which would have left a paper trail, but through something quieter and far harder to prove. A phone call here, a word to the right partner there, a gentle suggestion that a particular matter might be better handled through alternative channels rather than a formal review that could end up in writing. Simone signed the visitor log at 8:01 on a Tuesday morning, wearing a plain charcoal suit with no firm pin on the lapel, and made her way up to the 12th floor, where the contracts division kept its offices. She had memorized the floor plan 3 nights earlier, sitting alone at her kitchen table with a printed diagram and a cup of coffee that went cold before she finished. She knew exactly where she was going, and exactly why. She could hear the noise from Bradley's office before she even reached the open door. Loose laughter, the clink of a bottle against glass at 8 in the morning. 3 associates gathered near a bar cart along the far wall like the workday hadn't started yet. Because for them, in every way that mattered, it hadn't. A second-year paralegal named Delilah Foss stood near the bookshelf with a stack of case files pressed to her chest, staring hard at the carpet, the way a person stares at something when they've already decided not to be noticed. Simone stepped inside and set a folder of case assignments on the corner of Bradley's desk, exactly as she'd been instructed to do at the front desk. Bradley looked up from his conversation, took in her plain suit and unfamiliar face, and didn't bother lowering his voice. "You're lost, sweetheart. Temps check in downstairs, not in my office." One of the associates near the bar cart, a broad-shouldered man named Tanner Judd, laughed before Simone had said a single word back, the kind of laugh that existed purely to encourage whatever came next. Simone didn't raise her voice. "I found the office just fine," she said. "Thank you." It was the wrong answer, and she knew it the moment it left her mouth, because it meant she hadn't flinched, and Bradley Cross had an audience now, 3 of them, waiting to see what he'd do about a temp who talked back. He straightened off the edge of his desk and took a slow step toward her, the kind of step that assumed it had all the time in the world. "You know what?" he said, glancing at the others first, performing for them before he'd even finished the sentence. "I should explain something. Since you're new, every associate who walks through that door goes through a little tradition around here. Kind of a welcome ritual. Nothing personal." He picked up the heavy crystal tumbler sitting by his hand and turned it once in his fingers, almost lazily, bourbon catching the light. "Just helps everybody understand how things work, where they stand." Simone watched him raise it. She did not step back. She did not look away. The tumbler sailed past her shoulder and detonated against the wall behind her, spraying glass and bourbon across the bookshelf, across the carpet, across the toe of her shoe, and for one full second, the office went completely silent before the laughter broke loose all over again, louder this time, filling every corner of the room. Tanner Judd doubled over, slapping the edge of the bar cart. Bradley stood in front of her, waiting for tears, waiting for panic, waiting for the frantic scramble of someone who didn't know how to hold themselves together. He got a woman standing perfectly still, both feet planted, looking down at the broken glass scattered around her shoes, and then directly at him, with an expression he had absolutely no category for. "I'm going to need your employee ID number, Mr. Cross," she said, evenly, the way a person requests information they already fully expect to receive. The room found that even funnier than the glass. Bradley rattled off the digits like a punchline, grinning at his audience the entire time, and Tanner sang the number back in a mocking sing-song that the other two associates picked up like a chorus. Simone Baptiste memorized every one of those digits. She memorized every laughing face in that office, the exact angle of Bradley's grin, the sound of the glass still settling against the baseboard behind her. And she memorized the one face in the room that hadn't laughed at all, Delilah Foss, still staring at the carpet, still saying nothing, her arms wrapped so tightly around her files that her knuckles had gone pale. Simone bent down slowly and brushed a fragment of glass off the cuff of her trousers, unhurried, her hands perfectly steady, and something about that stillness seemed to unsettle the room more than any reaction would have. The laughter thinned at the edges. A couple of the associates who had been howling a moment earlier went quiet, watching her now with an expression that was not quite amusement anymore, something closer to uncertainty, though none of them could have said exactly why. Bradley's grin held a beat too long before it caught itself. A half-second flicker that no one else in the room seemed to notice but Simone. She turned, without another word, and walked out of the office, her steps even, glass crunching softly under her shoes, the laughter trailing after her all the way down the corridor. She let it follow her. She had somewhere else she needed to be, and she had exactly 40 minutes to get there before the room she was walking into would change everything about the room she had just left. She locked herself in a restroom at the end of the 12th floor hallway before anyone could see what the last 10 minutes had cost her physically, if not emotionally. A faint amber stain had already soaked into the collar of her blouse. A sliver of crystal clung to her jacket, just below the shoulder blade. She stood at the mirror for a long moment, looking at a woman who was composed but marked, and thought about how many times over 12 years she had stood in restrooms exactly like this one, cleaning some version of this exact moment off her clothes before walking back into a room that expected her to pretend nothing had happened. She picked the shard off carefully, held it up to the light for a second, and sealed it into a small evidence envelope she had carried in her bag since her second year of practice, writing the date, time, and floor across the front in small, neat handwriting. Old habit, Habits like that had a way of becoming useful. She rinsed the stain as best she could, straightened her jacket, and told herself, the way she had told herself 100 times before in rooms just like this one, that she had been underestimated for 12 years and had never once let it show. She was not going to start today. 40 minutes later, she sat in the 40th floor boardroom in the seat assigned to her. Not the empty chair at the head of the table, but the one halfway down the side, unremarkable, exactly as she'd requested, while Emmett Whitaker stood and told the assembled senior partners that a confidential 14-month succession review had concluded, and that effective the following Monday, the firm's new managing partner would be Simone Baptiste. He read through her credentials slowly and deliberately. The University of Michigan degree, the Georgetown Masters, the 2 Fortune 500 fiduciary defenses, and added, almost as an afterthought that carried the weight of an earthquake, that she was also the youngest managing partner the firm had ever appointed, and the first black woman to hold the position at any major firm in the state. 14 heads turned toward the woman in the stained charcoal suit. She did not move. She did not unfold her hands. Desmond Sinclair, seated at the far end of the table, gave her the smallest possible nod, the kind that offered nothing and promised even less. When the meeting adjourned, Desmond approached her directly, mentioned that his calendar was, unfortunately, quite constrained over the coming weeks, and suggested his assistant would reach out to coordinate timing eventually. She recognized the maneuver instantly for what it was, a polite, professionally deniable delay tactic from a man who had spent 30 years never needing to hurry for anyone. Later that morning, she walked back into Bradley's office and told him plainly, without raising her voice, that she had already filed a formal incident report with the firm's Director of Risk and Compliance, and that the review board would be reaching out by the end of the day. He said nothing. His hand moved off the desk and disappeared into his lap, where she couldn't see it shaking. What she didn't yet know, but was about to learn from a woman 2 floors below who had been waiting 15 years for someone willing to open a folder, was exactly how deep the protection around Bradley Cross actually ran. Louise Abernathy, the firm's Director of Risk and Compliance, closed her office door, unlocked a filing cabinet behind her desk, and set a thick accordion folder on the surface between them. 18 years, she said. I've held this position. I have watched Bradley Cross escalate since he was a first-year associate who threw a stapler at an intern. Inside the folder were 7 names, 7 resumes, 7 documented departures spread across 6 years, every single one following the same pattern. A complaint quietly filed, quietly reviewed, and quietly closed through what the official record simply called alternative channels. Disproportionately women, disproportionately junior. Every one of those channels, Louise explained, tracing a finger down a list of dates, led back to the same signature on the same internal letterhead, belonging to a man who had never once, in 15 years, formally disclosed that Bradley Cross was his own nephew. I flagged every one of these, Louise said quietly. I escalated 3 of them personally. Each time, I was told the matter had been handled through other means. I have been waiting for someone in that chair willing to actually open this folder. Simone took it from her without a word, and felt its full, considerable weight settle into her hands. She opened it slowly, right there in Louise's office, and read each name aloud, one at a time, as though saying them out loud made them harder to look away from. Adriana Cole, Mei Ying Zhou, Dorian Wells, names that meant nothing to her yet and would mean everything within the week. Louise watched her read, arms folded, and said quietly that she had followed the firm's own procedures at every single step, filed every escalation exactly as the handbook required, and had still watched every single one of those 7 people leave the firm while the man responsible kept climbing. "I need everything," Simone told her. "Not just these 7. Every margin note, every redacted exit interview, every maintenance request filed out of that office in the last 9 years. Louise nodded once, already reaching for her phone. "It's already pulled," she said. "I started the day the committee voted." Simone looked at her for a long moment and understood, for the first time since walking into that building, exactly how long some people had been waiting for someone willing to act on what they already knew. Louise mentioned, almost as an afterthought on her way to the door, that Bradley Cross had a sponsor 2 floors above them, a senior partner who had been quietly protecting him since his very first year at the firm. Simone had already suspected as much, ever since Desmond Sinclair had given her that unreadable half-nod across the boardroom table. But hearing it, confirmed out loud, still landed differently. "Does it appear anywhere in these files?" she asked. "Nowhere," Louise said. "The relationship has never been formally disclosed. Technically, it isn't even a violation on its face, because Mr. Sinclair has never personally signed off on any of Bradley's reviews or disciplinary matters. He has simply made sure, for 15 years, that the partners who do sign off on those things understood which way the wind was blowing." Simone sat with that for a long moment, turning the accordion folder over once in her hands. She thought about the paralegal in the corner of Bradley's office, arms wrapped tightly around her files. She thought about the faint stain still visible on her own collar. 7 documented names sat on the desk in front of her, and almost certainly dozens more who had simply left quietly enough never to become a folder at all. She thought, too, about the 72 hours she had originally planned to spend quietly mapping the firm's internal politics before making a single move, and understood, sitting there with that folder in her lap, that the timeline she had planned for herself no longer belonged to her. Whatever came next would have to come faster than she had intended, and she would need every one of those 40 minutes still left before her next meeting to decide exactly how much faster. Simone did not wait for the 72 hours she had originally planned to spend quietly mapping the firm's internal politics. Within the hour, her phone buzzed with a call from Louise, who told her, in a carefully flat voice, that Desmond Sinclair had walked into her office unannounced and was sitting across from her desk, requesting a copy of the incident report and full access to the Contracts Division archive. "He's being very calm about it," Louise said. "Very patient." Simone told her to say she'd be down in 7 minutes, and to let him wait. She wanted those 7 minutes. She wanted Desmond sitting in that small office, surrounded by Louise's wall of locked filing cabinets, long enough to feel the room for what it actually was. When she arrived, Desmond stood to greet her with the easy, practiced warmth of a man who had spent 30 years never needing to hurry for anyone, and spent nearly 4 minutes talking about institutional memory, discretion, and the importance of full context before he came anywhere near the actual reason he was sitting there. Simone let him finish completely. Then, without raising her voice, she said, "Mr. Sinclair, Bradley Cross is your nephew, your sister's son." The silence that followed was unlike any silence the room had held before it. Desmond's expression didn't crack. He was too disciplined for that. But something behind his eyes recalibrated in real time. The look of a man realizing the floor he'd built his entire career on had just been quietly removed while he wasn't watching. "I'm not sure where you're getting your information," he said carefully. "You never disclosed the relationship when he was hired." Simone said. Not in his reviews, not in his promotions, not in a single disciplinary matter in 15 years. That's not an assumption, Mr. Sinclair. That's Article 7, Section 4 of this firm's own bylaws, and you have been in continuing violation of it since the year he joined. He told her, quietly, that she was making a significant assumption about the support she believed she had in that building. She told him she wasn't assuming anything at all, that she would be reviewing the firm's governing documents with outside counsel by the end of the week, and that in the meantime, any further involvement from him in the Bradley Cross matter would be documented as active interference in an ongoing investigation. He left without extending his hand. 2 days later, a story broke in a legal trade publication called The Ledger Brief, describing the firm's new managing partner as aggressive, procedurally reckless, and appointed through a process whose criteria had not been made fully transparent to the partnership. It cited unnamed senior partners expressing concern over governance norms. It named no names directly and needed none. Simone read it twice in her car before sunrise, the way she read every difficult document, slowly, completely, before allowing herself to react to a single sentence. She recognized the shape of it immediately, not an accusation, a suggestion, planted exactly where it would land hardest before the weekend news cycle went quiet. She did not call Louise first. She called Ingrid Larson, a reputation strategist who had known Simone since their first year of practice and now ran communications for one of the most respected firms in the country. I already saw it, Ingrid said before Simone had finished a sentence. I'm already pulling the byline. Within hours, Ingrid had traced the leak back to a junior partner named Julian Holloway, who had spent nearly 40 minutes in Desmond Sinclair's office the previous afternoon and owed Desmond a favor from a client transition 3 years earlier. You're not playing defense, Ingrid said quietly, once she'd laid it all out. No, Simone told her. I'm not. She told Ingrid exactly what she wanted instead. Not a defensive statement, not a quiet clarification issued through a press office, but a full and immediate disclosure of the succession committee's actual criteria. The composition of the committee and the vote itself, released the same day the review into Desmond Sinclair was formally opened. He's counting on the books staying closed, Simone said. They've stayed closed for 15 years. He cannot survive them opening. Ingrid was quiet for a moment on the line, and then said something that stayed with Simone for the rest of that week. You drafted this disclosure package already, didn't you? Before any of this happened. Simone had. She had drafted it 3 nights earlier, sitting at the same kitchen table where she had memorized the floor plan, because she had understood, long before she ever set foot in that building, that a story like this one would eventually need to be told on her terms, in daylight, rather than dragged into the open by someone else on theirs. She had not known, 3 nights earlier, exactly which senior partner would try to bury it. She had simply known that someone would try, and that whoever it was would move quickly once they realized what she already knew. Ingrid promised to have the disclosure package ready for release by the following morning, and told Simone, before hanging up, that she had rarely seen anyone walk into a new position this prepared to defend it. Simone didn't think of it as defense. She thought of it as the 12 years it had taken to learn exactly how these rooms worked, and exactly what it cost to finally stop letting them work against her. Simone made one decision that morning that surprised even Emmett Whitaker, who had known her for over a year and thought he understood how she moved. She did not respond to the article defensively. She opened the books instead. By late morning, she had drafted a full disclosure package outlining the succession committee's actual criteria, its composition, and the unanimous vote that had led to her appointment, and she brought it to Emmett's office herself, rather than routing it through committee. He read it twice, set it down, and asked her if she understood what she was about to do to Desmond Sinclair's 30-year reputation in a single afternoon. "I understand exactly what 15 years of protecting his nephew already did to 7 other people," she told him. "I'd like your signature." He signed it without another word. By early afternoon, the firm's general counsel had formally referred the entire Bradley Cross matter to outside counsel, a step that converted a quiet internal review into a documented investigation that no phone call and no favor could quietly close. By evening, the firm had issued a full public statement disclosing the succession committee's actual criteria, the unanimous vote behind Simone's appointment, and the newly opened conflict of interest review into Desmond Sinclair himself. The story that had been built to make Simone look reckless instead exposed exactly what 15 years of protection had cost the firm, in careful, sourced, undeniable detail. Desmond Sinclair submitted a request for early retirement within the week. Timed, everyone understood, to let him leave on his own terms before the review concluded. Simone declined the request personally. The review would proceed to its conclusion first, she said, and it did. The partnership voted 9-4 to remove him from the firm for cause, and the brass nameplate in the lobby was scheduled to be updated to read Whitaker, Baptiste, and Pemberton by the end of the quarter. Bradley Cross was terminated 12 days into the investigation. Once outside counsel confirmed 4 additional former employees willing to testify, now that they understood, for the first time in 9 years, that they were actually protected from retaliation. His state bar license went into formal disciplinary review the same week, and 2 attorneys at competing firms privately told colleagues they doubted he would ever practice in the state again. Delilah Foss, the paralegal who had stood silently in the corner of that office with her arms full of files, was promoted within her first month under new leadership and given both the budget and the institutional backing to design a firm-wide mentorship and reporting program from scratch, one that received nearly 50 sign-ups before its official public launch. On a Monday morning 3 weeks after the glass shattered against that wall, Simone parked in the executive garage beneath a freshly updated nameplate that read her own name in full, sat with the engine off for 1 quiet minute in the early light, and walked inside to begin the actual work she had been hired to do. Desmond had not written the article himself. Everyone understood that much. He was too careful to leave fingerprints, but he had made a call, or someone had made a call for him, to the right reporter on the right morning, and it had very nearly worked exactly as intended. Within days of the disclosure, 3 senior attorneys at competing firms reached out to Simone personally, one congratulating her on the appointment, one commending the transparency of the disclosure package, and a third admitting, with careful understatement, that he had privately wondered for years what was actually happening inside that firm's contracts division. The mentorship program Delilah designed launched 8 days after her promotion, built from scratch on a modest operating budget and full institutional backing, and it received nearly 50 sign-ups in its first week alone, more than anyone in leadership had projected. A new compliance intake process replaced the old one entirely. Every complaint now logged with a mandatory timestamp and parallel filing to outside counsel. No redacted exit interviews. No cleanup requests that quietly closed without follow-up. None of it was dramatic. Simone had never wanted dramatic. She had wanted the kind of change that embedded itself into the daily operations of a firm and stayed there long after the trade press moved on to its next headline. What would you have done, sitting in that chair, watching that glass hit the wall behind you, walked away, or stayed exactly where you were standing. Emmett Whitaker told her, on that Monday morning, that he had wanted her in that chair for 2 years, and that he had been afraid, more than once during those 3 weeks, that Bradley Cross's carelessness might cost the firm the very person he'd spent 2 years trying to bring in. She told him he had nothing to worry about. She had never once considered walking away, not because she wasn't afraid of what she might lose, but because she understood, better than almost anyone else in that building, exactly what staying could still change. She had learned that lesson long before Whitaker, Sinclair, and Pemberton ever existed to her. In every room throughout her career that had assumed she didn't belong, and she had no intention of unlearning it now that she finally sat at the head of one, in a building that, for the first time in its history, actually had her name on the door. That morning, before her first meeting, Simone found a folded note waiting on her desk from Delilah Foss, the paralegal who had watched Bradley Cross humiliate a stranger and said nothing, because for 2.5 years, saying nothing had felt like the only way to keep her job. The note was short, handwritten, a little uneven near the bottom where Delilah's hand had clearly been shaking. It thanked Simone, plainly, for being the reason Delilah finally had something in that building she was proud to put her own name on, and it said, near the end, that Delilah had spent 2.5 years believing that speaking up would end her career, and that watching one woman refuse to flinch in that office had quietly undone every reason she'd ever had for believing that. Simone kept the note in the top drawer of her desk, beneath a stack of case files she reviewed daily, and by her own admission, she has read it more times than she would ever admit to anyone still working at that firm. 9 years is a long time for a pattern like Bradley Cross's to go unquestioned, protected not by any single dramatic cover-up, but by dozens of small, quiet decisions made by people who told themselves they had no other choice. It only took one woman refusing to flinch, and one director of compliance who had been keeping records for 18 years, waiting for someone to finally ask, to bring the whole structure down, not through anger, but through patience, documentation, and the simple willingness to keep watching until the exact right moment arrived. If you had been standing in Delilah's corner of that office, files pressed to your chest, saying nothing, what do you honestly think it would have taken for you to finally speak up? Tell us in the comments below, and if this story pulled you in the way we hope it did, wait until you hear what's coming next week, when a mother quietly discovers that the inheritance her late husband promised their only daughter was never legally his to give in the first place. Make sure you're subscribed to Hidden Yet Heard Tales so that story doesn't slip past you the way so many quiet truths in this world almost do. And we'll see you there.